Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, strivers, divers and sly connivers, welcome along to the Joe Spiver YouTube channel where we discuss books and little else. And you join me on, frankly, an unseasonably warm and perfect Tuesday here in northern Britain. It's almost as if anthropogenic climate change is sinking her teeth into our tendons. It's 22 degrees, there is no breeze, no wind, the birds are chirping, it's beautiful. I cannot wait for autumn to arrive. For mid-October, as I say, it's positively Venusian. There's sun, there's no breeze, there's nothing. It's beautiful. I've got big long coats to be wearing. I've got huge gloves to be putting on. I've got shawls and blankets to be wrapping around me whilst I read. All of that beautiful autumnal stuff that I'm usually engaging in now is impossible because I would sweat buckets if I did so. I'm still a little put out by all this. So I took myself down to my local retail bookstore, which, for those of you that don't know, for those of you foreign types that don't live in Britain, that is Waterstones in this country. I know it's Barnes & Noble in America. It's essentially the equivalent of that. Just a little bit of information. The only reason that I can frequent such retail bookstores, because as we all know they're extortionate, is because I am the disgraced lover, the disgraced sexual lover of an heiress stroke actress who pays me hush money, and so essentially I just reside here in the north of England until we both winter in Andorra. So that's the only reason that I can frequent a retail bookstore, is because otherwise I wouldn't be bothered. She's currently round the pool in Acapulco, for those of you bothered, on scene, and almost certainly cheating on me. But anyway, who's laughing now? I'm the one with all the money. And so I took myself down to the retail bookstore in order to cheer myself up. And in there I found an enormous queue full of 7, 8, 9 people at most. And behind the counter I found the most sort of officious and perfunctory and latently livid employee of Waterstones it could be possible to conceive. There was a lady she was serving who was heavily pregnant, who was having to walk up and down to show her, to reference different books on the shelves that she wanted. She clearly wanted multiple copies of them. But anyway, for some reason, seeing an officious, overbearing, slightly snobbish person who is only there to collect a wage and wants also to not only prolong their own misery, but wants to impart and prolong their misery upon you. For some reason, ladies and gents, that reminded me of university. I've no idea why. I can't possibly see the connection there. But for some reason, that type of person reminded me of some professors in university. So I have, on Tag Tuesday, created, drumroll please, my own tag. I know, aren't I doing well? I've taken off my booktube armbands and I'm beginning to swim. So I have a pile of books here, 9 questions, all themed around some of the tenets and some of my experiences at university. So I'm tagging 3 people, which you will learn in a few moments' time. But they're 9 questions, and let's get into them. So the first one, etymologically, the word university is derived from the Latin universitas, I'm going to murder this, universitas magistrorum et scholarium, meaning a community of teachers and scholars. What was the last book you read written by 2 or more writers in coordination? And for this, I have the rather recent Piva and Volkonsky translation of Anna Karenina, which, it won't surprise you to know, I didn't actually enjoy that all that much. It's not that I don't like it's not that I don't like Anna Karenina in general. I think I've read my introduction to that came in the shape of Rosemary Edmonds' translation, which was released in the 50s, I think. And this is the more modern one that was popularised, I believe, when Oprah Winfrey selected it for her book club, and it flew off the shelves. And I think that they're renowned for their lucidity, I think, Piva and Volkonsky. But I've always found I found in this anyway, this is the second time I've read this one, I've always found the dialogue rather stilted and a little bit, I don't know, I couldn't suspend disbelief as much as I could. The Rosemary Edmonds translation I found it was a little bit more imaginative and flourishing and a little bit more figurative and sort of a little bit more enjoyable to read on the sentence level, if we're going to use those really rather odd phrases that some literary critics use. But it's still decent. This was the last work that I read, Coordination, Piva and Volkovsky translation of Anna Karenina. They're said to be the closest to Russian. Those who speak both Russian and English say that this is the closest thing to Tolstoy's Imagining, but that's what everybody says of every translation. But yeah, that was the last book that I read in Coordination. Question 2. The University of Bologna saw the advent of the university as we recognise it today in 1088. What is your favourite / most recently read novel set in Italy? Well, as we know for Victober, I'm currently reading Romola, George Eliot's Romola, written in 1962. And though I have seen many of the trigger warnings that it's going to be very complicated, I'm actually very much enjoying it. It's really, 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 really good. And so I'll be talking of that I'll probably finish it maybe Thursday or Friday. But yeah, as with George Eliot, again, I'm feeling as if there's such an affinity between me and her, and I think between her and everybody who reads her, because she seems to be writing for me and me alone, and we get on so well on the page. But the one of my most favourite things that I've read this year that was also set in Italy was Antonio Sciurati's M. Son of the Century, the first of a tetralogy chartering Mussolini's rise to power. It's very good, sweeping. I think it covers the best part of a decade, translated by Anne Milano Apple, whom I hope gets her hands on the other few copies that have been released in Italian already. This is jolly good. It shows quite how a very persuasive orator and how a dictatorial power can utilise and weaponise the disillusioned masses of masculinity that were patrolling the streets of sort of early to mid 20th century Italy, antecedents to some political leaders of our time today, but obviously writes it beautifully and makes of Mussolini a hyper successful and productive manipulator, but also it doesn't engage in hagiography, doesn't for one moment let you think that this was a pleasant person to be around or somebody who acted out of higher moral purpose. He was clearly just looking to shoulder his weight to the wheel and to, what would you say, become premier of an entire country. He makes repeated reference to the what would you say, sexual repercussions of much of what Mussolini did. He was a horrid misogynist and thought that women were much the second-class citizen and viewed them merely as sexual objects. He doesn't subscribe too much to the great man of history, Thomas Carlyle's great man of history in this, and it's just so well written and was excellent. And that was the last novel that I read in Italy. But as I say, Romola's on the go at the moment. Question 3. University study usually involves a significant change of residence or lifestyle for the willing student. What is your favourite book / series focusing on an immediate change of residence? Now we have not so much a book as a series for this one, which will also feature later on in Victober, or in my Victober coverage. This is the Sherlock Holmes stories, in particular A Study in Scarlet, which is the first novel Conan Doyle wrote, I think late 19th century, if I'm correct, which is why it's going to back-end my Victober coverage. Dr. John Watson of the 4th or 5th Northumberland Fusiliers, don't take me on that. He is in London, receives a stipend or a pension from the army, and as I say, I needn't even preface this. Runs into a mutual friend between himself and Holmes, who is a cold, calculating young man, private detective, the only of the kind, and Watson's looking for a place to live, and he happens to have a room and bed free, and thus begin the most enthralling tales of mystery of the 19th century, quite possibly. They're excellent, and they were, what would you say, rendered timeless by Jeremy Brett in the 70s and the 80s as well. So yeah, I'm going to be reading Study in Scarlet for that, but that's My favourite book, I think, anyway, I did rack my brains, it seems a little bit of an obvious answer, but I think it's my favourite work involving somebody's immediate change of residence. I'm not sure, but yeah. I might have been clutching at straws with that part of the tag, but I'm sure you can all think of works that pertain to that. Okay, so question 4. The 21st century university student is expected to fork out tens of thousands in order to breach a university's sun-gilded facilities. Ironical, of course. Name a book that cost you an exorbitant amount in exchange for very little reward. I'm just bristling with humour, aren't I, with the way I write these tags. And this is... I shall have to hold it this way. Is that correct? Can you read that? Is that the correct way? Yes. This is David Cameron's political memoir, For the Record, which I believe retailed in Great Britain and Northern Ireland for £24.99 of your British sterling, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? That is, I mean, I suppose nowadays that would be seen to be an absolute steal for a popular political memoir. But back then, 4 or 5 years ago, this came out in 2019, you could almost buy a house for £24.99. Now you can't even get your hands on a selection of peaches for that amount of money. This cost me £24.99. I bought it in W.H. Smith in the airport and read it whilst I was in New York. And frankly, ladies and gentlemen, I believe it to suffer from the terrible ailment that most political memoirs suffer from, which is a weird, nostalgic, self-aggrandizing piece of carp, which is essentially, oh my gosh, I was caught in the worst political maelstrom that ever existed. If it hadn't been for 3 or 4 of these environmental circumstances or these political circumstances or anything of that nature, if it hadn't been for that, you'd be living in this case, a Cameronian utopia, the like of which you'll never see again. If it hadn't been for these 3 or 4 things and nothing to do with me, I'd have been the most successful politician since Walpole or whatever. When of course that isn't true. Many of the idiotic Boris Johnsonian antecedents of contemporary British politics, many of the Jacob Rees-Mogg Brexiteers, found their food in the reticence and the politicisation of essentially just little bits of infighting and upheaval that David Cameron presided over. Again, just he wants you to love him, talks about his days at Eton and his days in the Bulletin Club, and is just woefully dishonest. You can just so tell that he is woefully dishonest. Many of the claims that he makes regarding his premiership in this book are provably untrue. And so it cost me a bomb, and I didn't enjoy it. That's not true. I did enjoy it. It's written quite well. Probably ghostwritten, as most political memoirs are. I did enjoy it, but found it to be disagreeable. So that's question 5. Universities and their attached student unions boast innumerable societies that gather zealots of everything from badminton to beard trimming to bardolatry. Name your favourite book that creates a new or alternate society. And I have for you, take another sip of water, sorry. There wouldn't, even if it was warm, if it wasn't warm outside, there wouldn't even be this many interruptions. So it's the boondoggle of our time is warm weather. So a book that creates an alternate or potentially new or forecasted society. Again, a rather obvious choice. I have Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Set in the future, I believe. In a state not typified in the Orwellian tyrannies that were predicted in the mid 20th century of the boot against the citizen's face and huge sweeping surveillance states and things of that nature. Aldous Huxley predicts so presciently that individuals within a society will not forego or not see their liberties curtailed by aggressive and violent means, but will see it done by simply being distracted of it and by being bombarded with pleasure. He saw the rampant scourge of hedonism, which, as I say, typifies the 21st century pretty much everywhere but sort of South Korea and parts of Asia who have a decent moral code and things, but the West seems not to have that. It talks about the huge ubiquity of irrepressible sexuality, of people of marriage being a complete anathema to a kind of social moral code, and it's the world building and dystopian evocation that Huxley talks about isn't brilliant. It's not a believable world, but the bits in the world have just proved to be, I believe, very prescient, and so that's convincingly my favourite. It's convincingly my favourite of all the dystopian novels and all those that seek to, as I say, craft a society for the delectation of their readers. That's question 5. Number 6. This is a short one. What is your favourite novel set within the walls of a university campus? Now, it's hard to get away from. You've heard me venerate and idolise Martin Amis on this channel already, even though I'm only 5 or 6 videos in. But his father, Kingsley Amis, came to fame when he wrote Lucky Jim, which is about a reasonably failed intellectual who is tasked with writing a speech about the... What is the speech about? It's about a nonsense subject, and he gets drunk and embarrasses himself on campus, and that's very fun. And that gave birth to many of the other campus novels that we see today. But for visual aid, I have... Because I think my copy of Lucky Jim is perhaps in my dad's. I can't find it anywhere. I do have a little thin one. But this is Zadie Smith's On Beauty, which I think very, very loosely analogizes, or is very, very similar to Howard's End. I haven't read Howard's End, so I didn't know that until it was pointed out to me by a staunch academic. But this is, set in and around a university campus. It's a couple of families, one featuring a very priggish and straight-laced academic, and his wife, and how on earth they came to be entwined, and how his cheating is misogynistically reflected as an escape from something, and her cheating, or her consideration of cheating, is damned as repugnant, and all of the connotations of that type of thing. Zadie Smith, beautifully written as usual. I need to read her new novel, The Fraud, which is out everywhere for presumably the price of about $250,000 US. But I shall try and find it and try and remortgage this house so as to buy it and review it for you. But that's my favourite novel set on campus that I have a physical copy of here. And then we have only a few more, folks. Question 7, we have: universities are touted as bastions of free thought and uninhibited expression. Don't know why any of you are looking at me like that. Name a book you've read that is produced by someone with whom you fundamentally disagree with on the subject, but you like because of the eloquence or earnestness with which it is written. And this one is a bit of non-fiction, a very rare occurrence on BookTube. We have Tyler Hamilton's The Secret Race, or is it? Yeah, and Daniel Coyle, who was I believe the ghostwriter for this. And this is a tell-all memoir of Tyler Hamilton, who, as you can see, very nicely depicted here, was for some years the American cyclist Lance Armstrong's loyal lieutenant, his right-hand man, his accomplice in the Tour de France mountains when he was winning yellow jerseys for fun. And it's not that I don't like Tyler Hamilton or his style, his writing style, or essentially Daniel Cole's writing style, or his worldly perspective or anything of that nature, but he, time and time and again, points to the fact that obviously dope cheating and the use of performance-enhancing drugs like erythropoietin and anabolic steroids and things of that horrid nature, intravenously injecting poisons into your veins, was part of the culture of racing in the early and mid-90s, and so somehow he couldn't moralise in his head as soon as a needle was put in his hand, and as soon as a needle was put in his hand, he had no choice and felt a little bit bad, but was nonetheless forever destined to what these guys did was defraud a sponsor and a public of many, many, many millions of dollars. It's not that we thought that their cheating was in any sense illegal or somewhat, as we say, morally repugnant. It's that they knowingly lied and knowingly misled journalists and other conductors of interviews, and fans for years and years and years, and he tries to tell us that that was all okay because 7 or 8 American guys around him were doing it. It's well written and it's earnest, but if you could have just a 10-minute chat with him, I would love to tear a strip off him for that, because it boils my blood, that type of thing. And Lance Armstrong is a topic for another day, because I have certain opinions about him as well. But yeah, that is the best book that I've read on which I disagree with the writer completely, but enjoyed it for its own sake. Penultimate question, question 8. Universities pride themselves on facilitating the outbursts from previously silenced or oppressed minorities. Name a favourite book written by someone from an underrepresented group. And this is perhaps the most underrepresented and oppressed group currently in the 21st century. This is the Collected Speeches, Let Us Talk of Many Things, by the white, heterosexual, a conservative political commentator of the mid-20th century, or mid to late 20th century, William F. Buckley. If you didn't know, cogent, rational, reliable, conscientious conservatives are not allowed to exist in the 21st century media landscape, because all conservatives are troglodytes who slither down here and exude yellow snot and sweat profusely and go around whipping ethnic minorities left, right and centre. They are greedy, acquisitive guys that hate everybody but themselves. That, of course, is not true, but that is often how they are portrayed. So this is an excellent collection of William F. Buckley's speeches. The introduction to this is really marvellous about his preparation for his many speeches. He ran for New York Mayor, I believe, and lost. He's most famous for calling Gore Vidal an unmentionable pejorative term for homosexual on the internet, in one of the 1968 Republican-Democratic debates, I believe. And this is a collection of his memoirs. But yeah, as I say, the white heterosexual male who happens to be a cogent and, what would you say, demonstrably clever and thoughtful conservative isn't allowed to exist anymore. And so he stands as the apotheosis of a weird and unknown majority these days. So yeah, that's that. And then the final question, number 9, is university study can be riddled with dense, impenetrable scholarly tomes. What is your favourite piece of interpretive non-fiction written by an academic? Essentially, what's your favourite collection of essays? And I have James Wood's Serious Noticing, who I believe is Harvard's resident, not book critic, but this is in bits, isn't it? What on earth's gone on there? It looks like I've squirted juice all over the front and let it dry. Anyway, this copy's battered. He is I think he's Harvard University's resident professor of interpretive English literature or something like that. He writes for The New Yorker, and he talks in here about Saul Bellow, he talks in here about Dostoevsky, he talks about Zadie Smith, who we've already featured in here, about hysterical realism, and some of the... it's just very insightful, very well considered, very obviously widely and well read, but also doesn't forget that most criticism ought to be entertaining as well, because rather than have literary criticism sort of mounted onto your head with a helmet and thrust into you by way of instruction, he actually makes it an enjoyable artifact in and of itself to read. So this is quite a big collection, actually. Yeah, as I say, there's bits on... I think there's bits on Jane Austen, Keith Moon's drumming. This is packed full to the rafters with all sorts. So, and I can't remember if I was made to read this at university. I can't remember. We certainly read a lot of Edward Said, if that means anything to anybody. So that covers the university tag. But it is my solemn duty and obligation to pass this. What I'm sure you will agree is a very erudite tag onto some of you beautiful people at BookTube. So I have one of my recent commenters and subscribers, Renee at the Left-Handed Reader. I know you often don't do many tags, but please do this one. I think it's jolly good, and I would love to know some of your answers to it. Katie at Books and Things. She's not above doing tags, and so I would very much like to see her responses to this. And of course, the patron of BookTube, or patron/pariah of BookTube, Mr. Steve Donoghue, all the way out in Boston. If he would like to do this tag, that would be a wonderful honour to hear him answer some of my questions. But thanks for that, BookTube. I can sure you can see how I'm either sexually aroused or I'm just rosy-cheeked because of the warmth and humidity of this room. But yeah, it's boiling hot here, and I shall continue to swelter for the rest of the day. But thank you ever so much for watching BookTube, and goodbye.